Good stuff. So for the folks that are joining us for this Small Business Gateway event, cyber threats and attacks, preventative actions to protect your business. Just come on in, settle down. We are not going to be kicking off the actual formal proceedings until about 5 past, just to let everyone have a little bit of chance just to get online and get everyone sorted out through the various kind of webinar steps that they need to, just to be able to see us. Got a really good panel this afternoon, quite looking forward to the conversation. We've been having a blast on here before you were allowed in, just getting chatting and getting going. So yeah, we're looking forward to it. We've got some good questions, hopefully provoke some good conversation, and some questions from the folks that are joining us as well. What we've said is that throughout this, just to make people aware, any questions that are asked, or any questions you want to ask of the panel during the event, if you can basically submit them during the webinar through the chat function, we'll address them towards the end. So we won't be interrupting the flow of the event with questions from the side, but please feel free to ask them if anything comes to mind, and we will deal with those towards the end. Okay, see the number of attendees gradually increasing. So for the folks who are just joining us now, I'll give my little spiel again. Apologies for the people who've already heard it, but yeah, welcome to the session. We are just letting a number of folks get in and get set up. We'll be kicking off the event around about 5 past. So after we're sure that everyone's here that wants to be here. Got a good session. Looking forward to it. Good set of panelists, a good set of questions, potential for quite a good event. And just to make sure this is the one you think it is, this is the cyber threats and attacks, preventative actions to protect your business. And for anyone who wants to ask a question during the event, as we said to the folks that are in already, for new arrivals, if you do want to ask questions of any of the panelists as we go through, if we raise a topic or something that you would quite like to ask us about or explore in a little bit more detail, feel free to ask that using the chat function in the webinar, and we will address that towards the end. We won't be interrupting the flow of the conversation to take questions from the room, but we will quite happily address those towards the end of the session. I will say, if we don't have time to cover any of the questions that are raised in the webinar, if there's anything a little bit more complex, we will follow them up and be passing any information on to anyone that's requested it from us. I'll just make folks aware as well that the feedback from this session will be shared with the Scottish Government and the Small Business Gateway on any kind of issues that are raised during this. So if there's anything that people want to flag up, that will be sent on to the relevant folks after the meeting. So there's a couple of minutes in, we'll just give it another wee minute or so to see who else is going to join us, and then we'll get kicked off. Okay, I think I'll give my very, very last introduction in. That's so everyone that's joined us now. I think we've got a good, healthy number of people in who have joined the session now. We'll be getting kicked off in just a little session, just a little minute. So basically, we are recording this session. It's going to be made available afterwards, and it can be shared quite freely. I think the Small Business Gateway people have said it's going to be put up on the YouTube channel, but certainly folks who have been attendees should get a link to kind of review the video afterwards. Everyone has been muted to make sure that we don't have a kind of hubbub of background noise, and we won't be taking audio questions during the session. So if anyone actually has any questions that they want to ask us, use the chat function, and we'll deal with those towards the end of the event. We have got staff from the Small Business Gateway who are here in the chat system, and they'll be able to kind of keep an eye on what's going on and respond to anything that's there. If you do have any questions, put them through the chat. We will be covering them if we can towards the end of it, and anything we don't cover, we'll follow up afterwards and provide any kind of resources or so on if required. So I think that's us giving everyone long enough to get in. We've got a fairly stable number of attendees now, so let's get started. So I'm pleased to introduce the panel we've got here. I'll introduce myself first. So my name's Ian Lowe. I'm a principal consultant with Quorum Cyber, a dedicated cybersecurity company based in Edinburgh. On the panel with me today, I have Nicola Gandy from Azicus.io, who is specialist penetration testing and cybersecurity company, also based in Edinburgh. I have Declan Doyle from the SBRC, Scottish Business Resilience Centre. And we have a couple of folks joining us from Police Scotland. We have Detective Sergeant Craig Potter, who's got his webcam on, and we have, I'm sorry Gavin, I've forgotten your rank, but we also have on you go, sir, Gavin.
Sergeant
Gavin Jardine, who's joining us by voice but not by webcam today. So I think basically if we could just let the panelists have a say and just introduce themselves. Nicola, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
I will. Thanks, Ian, for the warm welcome. I'm genuinely delighted to be here today and to see so many small business owners getting stuck into cyber risk management, taking this brilliant step. Perhaps the first step for some of you. It honestly is great to see you all and kick off what I hope will be a helpful conversation and one that you can take with you on the long and successful road ahead for your businesses. As Ian said, I'm Nicola. I'm the director of Azicus.io, and we're what's known in cybersecurity as pen testers. And hopefully Ian will afford me a bit of time later in the session to give an example about what pen testing is. Essentially, we are friendly hackers. In a nutshell, we work with businesses of various sizes across all industries to conduct scheduled manual cyber attacks with permission, of course, against any aspect of a business that's facing the internet. So it might be your new app that you're developing, your user-friendly web platform that you're building, your office network, or even your staff as they're reading their emails. And we're not automated machines, we're dynamic, elite human hackers, and our job is to find vulnerabilities in a business's systems before an attacker gets there first.
Thank you very much, Nicola. If you don't mind, Craig, do you want to give us an introduction for yourself and tell us what your part of the police do?
Yeah, I'm Craig Potter. I've worked with Police Scotland and formerly Lothian and Borders Police for 13 years now. I've mainly worked as a detective. I did 6 years in economic crime, and I'm now just coming up to 4 years working in cybercrime investigations. I'm currently responsible for running a team responding to high-level cyber attacks right across Scotland, and we work closely with a National Crime Agency, National Cyber Security Centre and Europol in the fight against serious and organised cyber criminality. And on a sort of semi-professional personal level, I'm currently in the last few months of a degree in cybersecurity at Napier University as well.
I was about to ask which one was it, Abertay or Napier, so that's another tick box for the Napier crew. Fantastic. Yeah. Thank you very much, Craig. I guess in that case, Gavin, do you want to give us the other side, what you're doing in Police Scotland?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me along today. I'm interested to hear what everybody's got to say. I currently work within the cyber crime harm prevention team of Police Scotland. We're a national unit that cover the whole of the country. We occasionally work in tandem with Craig and his teams, and our basic role is to try and promote the messaging that comes from the National Cyber Security Centre and lots of other platforms in order to basically try and protect and keep people safe online. And of late, it seems to have been almost from the cradle to the grave. We deal with the vulnerable children at schools, online safety there, online grooming and the harms that can be caused by that for children, as well as businesses, which is why we're here today. And we provide a lot of information to businesses as well. From the Protect network in relation to the national threats to businesses, and then also work quite closely with the third sector. So we try and we've got fingers in many pies across the board, from business to private, public and third sectors. Personally, I've not got any cyber background. I've been nearly 28 years in the police, having been in Strathclyde, Grampian and obviously Police Scotland. I've done detective roles, frontline operational roles, and I can see where our own organisation can benefit from our cyber prevention message across the board, from frontline as well, to get that message out to the general public. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks very much. And last but definitely not least, Declan, would you like to introduce yourself and a little bit about SBRC?
Yeah, thanks very much, Ian. So as already said, my name is Declan. I'm the head of ethical hacking, so similar to what Nicola was describing there, the good guys of the hacking world. I'm the head of ethical hacking at the Scottish Business Resilience Centre. So for those that haven't heard of SBRC, we kind of do a bit of everything that's been described already on the panel. So we do cybersecurity, business resilience.
Oh, has Declan frozen? We tested the technology so many times, and we had a couple of dry runs, but you can't ever kind of account for what's going to happen on the day, can you? I'll give it just a second to see if Declan's going to unfreeze and spring back to life. No, I think okay. We're probably going to have to wait for Declan to rejoin. So we'll move on for just now. Oh no, hang on. Are you with us again, Declan?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
We can indeed, yes.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened there. I could still see everyone moving and talking, but I must have just dropped out. I'll just sum up. Sorry, just to keep things moving.
Take your time.
We're like the catalyst to make Scotland the safest place to work, live and do business, both on and offline. And we work closely with Scottish Government and Police Scotland and various partners across the industry.
Cool. So well, thank you very much. So thanks everyone for the introductions. Next thing we're going to move on to, the first question we've been posed is a foundational one. It's the definition of exactly what do we mean when we talk about cybersecurity. What do we actually mean by that? So I mean, I have my own ideas, but I'm not going to go first. I'll wait and see what other folks have said and maybe see if I can add anything to that. Let's go the other way around this time. Declan, if you want to answer the question from your point of view, what would you say in simple terms is cybersecurity?
So I think that the fundamental difference between or misunderstanding of cyber is that it's not IT, it's not tech. Cybersecurity is protecting not just your technical stuff, but all aspects of your organization from sort of basically online crime or cyber crime. So it is about more than just the technology, but the bringing together of technology and people to make sure that you are secure online. That's what I would say.
Good stuff. And well, at this point, actually, rather than do it in strict order, does anyone want to add into that from the panel? Who's got a burning desire to tell us what they think cybersecurity is?
Yeah, I'll jump in if that's all right. So from my point of view, cybersecurity is what you need to do to secure your computer or technical infrastructure and data against not just both malicious attacks, which Declan alluded to, but also disruption from non-deliberate acts, external actions. In my mind, you've got to look after the security of your data from every angle, and the route to cybersecurity is often similar for whether you're going to be subject of a cyber attack or whether there's a fire in your building that destroys your servers. Your sort of cybersecurity principles are very much the same. How do you recover from that? Where do you pick back up from that? And that's how I kind of see cybersecurity.
I guess this is what we refer to as the CIA triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and all of those aspects are an important part of it.
Yeah.
So Nicola, I guess our perspective is going to obviously come from a slightly commercial point of view, given that we both work for cybersecurity companies. So for yourself, how would you define cybersecurity then as a field?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's about raising for me, I want to raise awareness of the different aspects of cybersecurity. It's not a one-size-fits-all definition. You know, we work you and I, Ian, are in the business of offensive cybersecurity, looking at things from the outside looking in. You know, how do we go outside our house and look to see how secure it is from the outside? Very often we think of cybersecurity as being wholly defensive, and how can we be inside our house looking to patch things up? So for me, cybersecurity is looking at risk, and it's managing that risk in a way that helps us be more secure. So cybersecurity might not just be technical, as people have said. It might be more to do with insurances and assurances and behaviors of people that we put in place and that we manage as we go along with our businesses that help us be more secure. So cybersecurity, not necessarily a technical thing, but something very real that every individual has a role in. Anyone who's using your service systems has a role to play on a personal level. It's our behavior. They always say the weakest link in any cybersecurity setup is human. So yeah, for me, it's about bringing it away from the technical, and I like to bring it more into how does it affect our business day to day, and how is it a very human thing.
It's a very good point. I think I would echo that as well. One of the things we see a lot of is the manipulation of people, and whilst the technology, one of the things is that actually the technical solutions that we've got to protect businesses and to protect systems are actually very good. Antivirus systems are better than they've ever been. Firewall systems are excellent, and therefore it's actually become easier to attack the human being and to trick the person inside to do something rather than necessarily just attack the technology straight. So yeah, I think for me as well, cybersecurity is that all-encompassing piece, that it touches the technology, the human processes, and also, you know, your paper systems, all of the stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think of, all kind of fall in this thing. We need to kind of think about them as a cohesive unit. That's useful. So having set the basic definition, the next thing I guess we've been posed the question to discuss and have a bit of think about. It's just, why does it matter? Why is it important? Why does, in particular, let's put it in context for small business people, why is it important for a small business to be aware of cybersecurity? Anyone want to take lead off on that one?
Yeah, I don't mind taking off that one. To start with, or before the COVID-19 pandemic, our digital world was very important. You know, we were doing most of the kind of financial stuff and so forth in business, partially or partially online. But now, during the pandemic, it's pretty much become a necessity. It's pretty much essential for day-to-day life, whether it be you know, hosting meetings or communicating within your organization or externally. It's all done online now. So it's more important than ever to keep that safe, to keep that secure, to keep that, you know, you wouldn't want some kind of dodgy looking people walking in your office, walking about your office. So why would you let them do that online? It's more important than ever to be thinking about cybersecurity, because everything is online.
Yeah, I agree. If I could jump in there, it's
Absolutely.
very similar. It's cybersecurity. I would take away the word cyber and just think of it as security. How do you keep your valuables secure? If you put it back to the principles of what do you do when you leave your house every day, make sure the windows are closed, the doors are locked. And when you're inside, how do you operate? Do you leave your door open? Possibly you do, possibly you don't, but more often than not, you would keep it shut these days. So I think that principle is the same, and businesses have to be aware of that, because primarily a lot of the small businesses that will be here today are in the service industries and things like that. They don't have product as such. They may well have data, and that is the valuable stuff that they want to protect.
Absolutely. If I can, I'll make a comment on this one. I think one of the things that I think is particularly important here is because there are few other areas that could actually provide an existential threat to a small business. Something where essentially the internet and being globally connected has been a fantastic enabler for business. It means you can easily communicate with suppliers. You can have much easier access to sell your services or sell your products. It is a great enabler, but at the same time, it has also connected you to the world. And it's an unfortunate reality that all of the world is not nice. And by being connected to the world, you do open yourself up to the ability for someone to reach into the inner workings of your business and change the flow of money or arrange for something to be sent to someone it's not supposed to go to, or any one of these things that could, in actual fact, basically shut you down. And the reality of it is, as we'll get into in more detail with some of the other questions, I think we'll have some good conversation from the panelists about this, but actually being small is no defense at all in the cybersecurity realm. So you sadly have to care about it. Anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, could I jump in? So for me, why it's important, the power of data that we collate and we hold, and the risk of loss of that data and exposure to that data is massive, and the risk of loss of access to technology is massive. If you as a business think, how would you operate if you couldn't access any of the data that you hold, or if that data was stolen and exposed, the data of your customers, the data of your business was exposed, or how would you be able to cope if you couldn't use email, if people couldn't reach you via your website? That kind of putting it into that context and thinking about that, how would you operate, shows the risks that are around it. And some of the sort of high level stuff, we've last year we saw the first homicide declared as a result of a cyber attack over in Germany, a ransomware attack it was actually on a university, but there was a hospital connected to the university, and they couldn't use the operating equipment, and somebody died as a result of that ransomware attack. That shows the kind of significance. But it doesn't matter what size of organization or what size of business you are, could you go back to pen and paper or pencil and paper and cope with the loss of that infrastructure? And pretty much every single business would pretty much say no.
Yeah, I think I'll, if it's okay to just hop in on that one as well, is, you know, from a small business perspective, I know how much hard work it takes to start a business. I've done it myself. It's blood, sweat and tears. It's hard work. And I just think I would much rather put in a few days of work towards my cybersecurity from the very beginning and get it ingrained in my processes, make it a regular agenda item for myself, and put in 2 or 3 days of work a month, for example, than have to spend, God forbid, the next 2.5 years repairing the reputational damage or starting all over again with a whole new business. I would much rather be proactive about it, and that's why for me, as for smaller businesses, it's really important, because it can be make or break. It can be, without going down the scare tactics route, because it doesn't always seem helpful, or it doesn't make us want to engage. If we can make it part of our processes while we're small, as we grow and we continue to grow, we've got a much healthier road ahead, and we won't have to make that horrible call to our clients and let them know that we've been subjected to a data breach or so on. We all dread that. Nobody wants it. So being proactive is really important.
I couldn't agree more. Yes, absolutely. That idea of a little bit of preparation beforehand is worth its weight in gold compared to having to try and remediate afterwards. And so from that, I guess the next question that we've been asked, and this is where we start to get into the actual kind of the substance of the conversation more than anything else, is so what are the basic steps? What are some basic steps that businesses can take to keep themselves cyber secure? I have some ideas, but again, I'll step back and let the conversation flow a little bit. Who wants to lead in this one?
I'll quite happily go in there, Gavin, from the background here. I think what was mentioned there by Nicola there about people, it's people that run the business, it's people that operate the systems, etc. People are important. They're the weakest and the strongest link when it comes to security, whether it's cyber or otherwise. And I think as they are the gatekeepers to the security of any organisation, big or small, it's important that the organisations train their staff in cyber security. I'm not talking about IT training here or anything overly technical. Just talking about cyber security becoming as natural to the majority of people as kind of making sure their front door is locked when they go out, or locking their car when they park it in a city centre. There are other obviously measures to take, but I think if you can address how people operate and what's available to them, they don't need to know how the alarm on their car works. They just need to know that it works. and that's where people like of Nicola and Ian come into it with their expertise and their IT expertise that likes of myself personally don't have, but I need to know that it's working, and being aware that it's working is very important, and knowing how to test that it works or not, like a smoke alarm or a carbon monoxide alarm. All these things are second nature to us now. Why is that? Because we've all been made aware. It's in your consciousness all the time, and that's what we need to do, is to try and get cyber security and cyber into the public consciousness around everything.
Absolutely, yes. I think, Declan, you looked like you were wanting to speak in there. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I completely agree that a lot of it is down to awareness and just making people aware of, there are, unfortunately, in the world we live in, there are going to be people out there that want to try and exploit you in any way, shape or form they can. And so the basics are really important. Simple things like when you get that annoying notification in on your phone or your laptop that says it needs to do an update, I know everyone will dismiss it, but make sure you've set some time aside to allow it to do that update, because they contain really essential security fixes as well as new features and emojis that we all love. But yeah, they provide really good security features, making it even more difficult for the bad guys, and things like passwords, making sure that you've got a password. We actually like to use the term passphrase now, following the National Cybersecurity Centre's advice of kind of 3 random words, putting words together with a few special characters, spaces, numbers, things like that, just to make your password that extra bit secure, so that it's even more difficult to kind of crack or whatever. Yeah, so the basics, stuff that's freely available to do it. I think misconception that the starting point at cybersecurity is to throw loads of money at it. No, the starting point is to just invest a wee bit of time, as kind of Nicola was saying, time as you go, and sorting this out, and then it will become so much easier.
So one thing I would say, and this is, I find myself very often having to deliver what feels like bad news to businesses, because one thing that is unavoidable is that security and being secure in your business isn't something that you can do in isolation. It's not something that you can say you've got a small checklist of activities to do and that's you're now secure. It's actually more of an apex behavior. It's something that you, in order to be secure in an environment, you kind of have to be doing a lot of other things right. And in essence, what that means is your IT kind of has to be on top game. You have to have things that are, as Declan said, everything's getting patched, it's being kept up to date. The software is well configured, it's well maintained, and you are actually making sure that you're using products that are rather more secure by design, where at all possible. So there's an awful lot of things have to be done right. The good news is that more and more of the industry is, I think, coalescing on a minimum set of things that are what you need to do to make sure that you are safe. Now, we'll talk a little bit more throughout the session on the various kind of risks and threats that we see. But I think from Quorum Cyber's experience, when we are seeing people come to us in the middle of an incident and they need help, more often than not, we're finding one of two things. It's either ransomware, where someone has essentially managed to get something installed on someone's computer, it has encrypted the contents and throws up a message saying either you pay us so many Bitcoin or you're not getting your files back. Now, I would just mention on the side, please don't pay the ransom. It only encourages it, it makes it worse. Don't do that. However, the other thing is business email compromise. So where basically someone is essentially been had a hostile attacker gain access to their email account. And even then, that's not the end of the story, because most of the time when someone is subject to business email compromise, the thing that happens next is, and it's used to install some ransomware or to trick them into installing ransomware and so on. So all roads kind of lead to these paths at the moment. And if you actually implement, firstly, good solid email, and what that means now is, sadly, the days of running your own little mail server in the corner of your office, that's gone. That's not a safe thing to do anymore. If you're doing that, you have to be putting at least as much investment into keeping that little server secure as someone like Microsoft or Google are into keeping their mail infrastructure secure. And bluntly, you can't. So in reality, what that means is you should be using Office 365 or G Suite or a similar kind of platform level set of facilities. And the second thing is you should be using multi-factor authentication. using 2FA, the token on your phone every time you try to log in. If you do those things, you're actually clearing the bulk of the attacks. I guess, Nicola, you would probably add as well into this that it's important to be actively testing. So rather put words in your mouth, what did you kind of?
Yeah, always making sure that, I would always say that people have policies in place, and policies are great, but policies are only effective if you have the technology there to be able to implement them. So it's great to have, what we always advise against is copy pasting a policy off the internet. You have to make sure that all of your plans for your cybersecurity are specific to you and your business and the direction that you want to take. So there are some fantastic basic resources out there. I know that SBRC do some great work as well for helping businesses to do that work. It's about making sure that it's specific to you and that you're able to implement those policies, such as 2FA and all of those things. That great work that you were mentioning there. For me, some of the first steps is exactly what we're doing now. Attending this event is a perfect first step. And that's why I'm so happy that so many people are on it, because awareness is one of the key things and the most crucial things that you can do for your business. Very often we think of cybersecurity and we just want to put our fingers in our ears and bury our heads in the sand and run in the opposite direction. We just are bombarded with scare tactics and horror stories. And I think for me, it's about saying, embrace that. Don't let it scare you. Use it to your advantage. Use it to empower yourself in this fight against cybercrime. The more you know about the risks you face, the better position and stronger position you can put yourself in to counteract that. So don't be afraid of those risks. Attend more webinars like this. Stay aware of and on top of the threats that you're facing. You know, we go out in our car every day. It's one of the riskiest things that we do, but we love our cars. We put loads of money into it. We love them, we take great care of them and great pride in them, and we've absorbed that risk. So we're very familiar with it, and we've altered our behaviour to be safe on the road. So let's do the same things with our cybersecurity. I think those are some great first steps, which is engaging with events and engaging with cyber risk, and just making peace with the fact that we're all at risk.
Sound advice. Craig, is there anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, I think you've covered most of it, but just a couple of things to add from my kind of experience of dealing with a lot of companies who have been subject to cyber attacks. Those that recover very, very quickly, and that's generally within a couple of days to a week, or those that have a secure backup policy, as in they backup policy and procedures where they securely back up the data and information that they would need to get restarted again, and an exercised recovery plan that goes in tandem with that backup policy, where you've exercised that you've lost that data and you're going to recover from it. And I've seen companies that have one of each of those who've taken a long time to recover, and it's only generally the companies that have both of those working well in tandem together that recover from cyber attacks really quickly. And even if they're a major ransomware attack, it's encrypted all the data across a multinational organization. If they've got those two things in tandem, they can recover pretty quickly. But I've seen companies who have secure backup policies only lost a day's worth of data, but it takes them 6 to 9 months to recover because they hadn't anticipated how they get that data back into a working network again. And I've seen companies that have a world-class recovery plan, but they have a backup that's connected to the network, and so their backup was encrypted as well, and they just can't recover. So those sort of two things are what I would add on, that you as a business, you need to think up, how am I backing up my data? And if I'm subject to a cyber attack, how am I going to recover from that using my backup data? Yeah,
indeed. But again, sound advice. I hope the folks on the session here are listening and getting something of value of this, because this is good stuff. We've got another question. I think this is the last question that's been asked for the panel as just a general discussion, and then we've got questions that have been asked of the specific panel members. So this one, last kind of general discussion. That being said, it kind of feels like it was kind of handwritten for Declan. So this one is basically, what tools and resources are available for small business to use to ensure their cybersecurity? And if that's not a chance to talk about SBRC's mission statement, I don't know what is.
Yeah, I can definitely at my portion kind of go through each of these in a wee bit more detail. But SBRC has quite a few initiatives where we've partnered with Scottish Government, so that it's completely free to every business or organisation that wants to take part in. So we have things like the facilitation of exercise in a box. So I'd imagine there's quite a few on the webinar this afternoon that don't know what exercise in the box is. So I've mentioned before the National Cyber Security Centre, the kind of UK's technical authority for all things cybersecurity. They're a civil service department. They have developed this kind of exercising toolkit called Exercise in a Box, and it's basically a way that you can, as an organisation, walk through kind of with pen and paper, kind of taking it nice and steady, everything about your cybersecurity plans and your organisation. So the scenarios focusing from like working from home, or what do you do when you get hit with a phishing email that can kind of develop into ransomware? What do you do to make sure that your supply chain is secure? All of those kind of scenarios. So SBRC are working with Scottish Government to facilitate that. So you can basically join one of our sessions and we can walk you through these exercises with our ethical hacking team. And you get some invaluable advice. You get to find out where you are. You'll always leave with questions, but we will show you how to answer those questions, which I think is the most important part. And it's not someone telling you that these are the questions you need to be asking. It's you finding that out yourself, saying, oh, here's the questions that we should be asking, and making sure that you're owning your own cybersecurity journey, which I think is really important. And again, these sessions free to attend, and they're not too technical at all. I would go as far as to say as you don't need to be technical at all to join. Our team can walk you through them. So a really great way to kind of identify where you're at. And then just briefly, I'll touch on, we have an executive education program. So we've partnered with Kieran Martin, who is the former head of the National Cybersecurity Centre. And again, we're delivering that to executives and directors across Scotland to kind of give you an understanding of what's out there in terms of cybersecurity, what you need to think about, how you can focus your business on dealing with cybersecurity. Again, going back to this theme of not just an afterthought, not just something you need to kind of work with to get up to scratch. It's something that you're actively thinking about as you go. And then finally, sorry for the long-winded answer, but we also have another initiative at SBRC called the Cyber Instant Response Helpline, and I'll come more to this later on. But the kind of summarized version is that this is a number that you can call between the hours of 9 to 5. If you have touch wood, you don't, but it does happen. If you happen to have a cyber incident, you can phone this number. We'll help you kind of understand what's happened, try and triage you, make sure you're all right, and then we will signpost you to some of the larger organisations, some of the cyber organisations in Scotland that can actually help you do that kind of large-scale data recovery, like Ian and Quorum do some of that large-scale data recovery and any sort of malware analysis and all the technical stuff that needs to be done. And we'll all work together and make sure you're all up back on your feet, and it means you guys can get on with doing what you want to do rather than having to constantly worry about cybersecurity.
Good stuff. Thanks, Declan. And as I said, it was almost purpose written for yourself there. I guess as well, Nicola, you through Azicus, you're involved in delivering cyber essentials. That might be relevant here. Have you got other things that maybe would be relevant as well to talk about?
I would probably bounce that back to Declan, as I know that Cyber Essentials is something that SBRC are doing a particular push on at the moment. It's not something we do at Azicus ourselves, so we do. I know. We're like, oh, why do you not do it? But we focus our efforts just in other areas. And we do something as a cybersecurity maturity assessment, which is perhaps even before you get to Cyber Essentials stage or after, and it's very much organisation specific based on the stage in your journey in your relation to cybersecurity, where you're at now, where you're looking to be, and what steps you might be able to take over a course of months or up to 12 months, really, to help you get to that level of cybersecurity. So rather than it be the Cyber Essentials scheme itself, which is another excellent opportunity, which, as again, like I say, Declan will be able to signpost you on. It's what we do is more of a working with you on, say, a monthly basis over a period of time to help you implement some of those measures and get you either ready for Cyber Essentials, or if you've already got it and you're looking to take the next steps, it's kind of either side of that.
No worries. My apologies there. My pre-game research has let me down. Sorry about that.
I will accept your apology, and only because because the cybersecurity scene in Scotland are such good friends. Because we're good friends between advocates and Quorum, and we go back a long way.
Indeed. So Craig, I think were you trying to get our attention there as well? You maybe had something to suggest of maybe tools or resources.
Not massively, but I would say that Declan kind of alluded to the National Cybersecurity Centre. There's a lot of information with the National Cybersecurity Centre, Information Commissioner's Office about what your kind of obligations are and what is expected of you as a business in relation to keeping your networks and people's data secure, and the best ways of doing that. And some really simplistic advice, and those are kind of the resources, particularly if you're a small business without a lot of money to put into your cybersecurity, that you can go to get the kind of top level advice from the National Cybersecurity Centre and look to implement in order to kind of push things forward.
Good stuff. Gavin, is there anything you want to add at this point?
To be honest with you, yeah, from what Craig's just said there, and then what Declan has just said there, yeah, there are quite a lot of tools and resources. But SBRC certainly would be where I would go and look for some advice myself if I was a small business looking for that. My team, we are very much the principles behind cybersecurity, and there's a numerous areas for resources and information to pass that on to folks. So I'll bow to those who know better than I on this occasion.
Good stuff. Well, certainly there's just one that I would add, which is essential. And again, it's referencing back to the NCSC. You'll hear us mention them repeatedly. There was a time, and I remember it not very fondly at all, but there was a time when those of us who were trying to improve security of businesses in the UK knew that there was this body of knowledge within GCHQ, but had no access to it whatsoever. And it was very frustrating. So now that we've actually got the NCSC in existence, and they have that outreach mission of deliberately bringing the knowledge that they have about how to secure systems and what threats are extant in the place at the moment, they basically are a great resource to tap into. Now, one thing I would flag people to have a little search for, if you want to find out about cybersecurity, if you want absolutely any aspect of cybersecurity to be demystified or be explained a little bit, what you need to look for is a publication that the NCSC funded, along with, I believe it was Sheffield University, but I'm not entirely certain. It was one of the UK universities. And they funded a piece of work called CYBOK. And CYBOK, CYBOK, is a cyber book of knowledge. It's an attempt to replicate a similar thing which was used by business analysts in the business analyst industry called BABOK, which is essentially, again, that way of codifying pretty much all of the knowledge that you need to have to engage with an industry and to understand all of its terminology, what the services are, how they work, and how you can consume them, how you can use them, how to implement things. So when we throw around terms like 2FA or multi-factor authentication or any of these sorts of things, and you want to know what that actually means in very easy to understand terms, go and have a Google for CYBOK, download it. It's maybe about a 7 or 8 megabyte PDF. And that will explain pretty much everything you could need to know. It's a fantastic primer, and the NCSC have made it available completely free of charge.
Yeah, we'll follow it. NCSC has got some amazing resources, and I always signpost any small businesses that I'm engaging with to the small business toolkit, the small business guide, sorry, the NCSC small business guide. Again, it's free, it's a free accessible resource. And once you're on that, it's very easy to navigate piece of work that I think has got some great hints and tips, going back to what we were saying earlier about first steps. It's got some really helpful pointers, and it really helps to break down some of that jargon that can be a little bit painful and off-putting. So between that and CYBOK, I think we've got some excellent places to start. Absolutely,
and all for the best price of free. There we go.
And if can I just come in, Ian? Sorry about that. Just
absolutely
as well. On Nicola's note of saying, we're all friends, that is very true in the cyber security industry in Scotland. So much so that there's actually a new initiative launched called Cyber Scotland and the Cyber Scotland Partnership. And this is a big collaboration between Scottish Government, Police Scotland, SBRC are a partner, Skills Development Scotland, all sorts of organisations across Scotland coming together with the pure focus of cybersecurity. And if you're thinking, listening to this webinar, we're listing off huge amounts of resources that are all absolutely fantastic. Cyber Scotland is actually just a website, or the Cyber Scotland website is a place where it just brings it all together. So if you are unsure, just go to the Cyber Scotland website and you'll be able to see all these resources from the NCSC and all sorts. So it's a really great way to kind of bring everything together, and it's purely focused on Scotland. So really local advice, and particularly for kind of smaller businesses that are just not sure where to start off with.
Cool, excellent. Thank you very much, Declan. So the next phase of the webinar, the next piece, is where we've been asked questions that are targeted at one of the panelists. Now, I'm having a wee look at the list of questions, and I'm not entirely sure, but I appear to have one more question than everybody else. So I'm going to go first and take off one of my questions, and then we'll kind of move on to someone else and give them a chance to kind of talk rather than listening to my dulcet tones. So the question I've been posed, as an OTA, it's a doozy, is how do cyber criminals typically target businesses, and how can they be a threat? Now, that's just a pretty open question, but that being said, I've got some good answers, I think. So I'm going to focus a little bit on this one of the key term, the question there, target. How do they target businesses? So one of the things you need to be aware of in a lot of cases is they don't. Cyber criminals do not always target you. They may well impact you, they may cause you catastrophic harm to your business without ever having any grudge or harm or even knowing who you are. An awful lot of cybercrime happens in what you would probably consider to be the criminal equivalent of someone walking down a street trying the handle on each car to see which one opens. And if yours was unfortunate enough to be the one that was left unlocked that day, well, you're the one that's having a bad day. You weren't targeted, you just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and be one of the low-hanging fruit. Now, there is a lot of targeting that goes on, and businesses are specifically targeted. Now, we would say there's a whole science to this, a study of threat modeling that we use when we engage with clients to understand their place in the world, how they make business, how they make money, where they do business, where their supply chains are, all of these things, because they all have a bearing and they can all introduce risk factors. If you think about it for a moment, if you are operating in a business and you're doing advanced material science and you're looking at some crazy new material that could have implications for the energy sector, surprise, surprise, you're going to have a lot of people sniffing around and wanting to steal your IP. Similarly, if you're in the sort of business that you see huge numbers of fairly chunky cash transactions, like, for instance, a law firm that does property conveyancing, yep, financial fraud is going to find its way to your door. That's just the nature of the thing. And in those cases, yeah, you will be targeted. You'll be targeted by your membership of a particular business sector. You'll be targeted by your membership of a particular type of industry. So that sort of thing does happen. Now, in terms of how the actual cybercrime takes place and how it unfolds, there's a fascinating amount of similarity between the legitimate business world and the criminal business world, in that if you imagine companies like Dun & Bradstreet, who will make their money by looking at huge big contact lists of people and businesses and then applying quality metrics against them, applying credit rating against them, doing these things and then selling their filtered lists onwards for you to go and speak to potential business prospects. In exactly the same way, there are tiers of cyber criminality. There are forums who will attempt to harvest credentials, so usernames and passwords and email addresses that have been stolen every time a major website is breached. And they'll be looking through them and trying to filter through to figure out if they can marry up, for instance, two different leaks, one of which gave a username and password and one of which gave potentially a payment mechanism or an Amazon account or a bank details or something like that. And gradually what they will do, in a very similar way to Dun & Bradstreet, they'll filter these through and then they'll sell on bundles of pre-vetted higher quality contact details to other cyber criminals to go and attack. And in essence, what you may well find is that if your credentials were part of one of the big leaks, like I think maybe a couple of years ago, my credentials and my credit card number were leaked. Thank you, British Airways. Brilliant. However, the likelihood is that the people who carried out that attack were not the same people who were then going to try and plug my credit card details into a website to get a hooky television off Amazon. No, they were going to bundle that information up and sell it on for $10 on the details to someone else who would then carry out the attack. So when you understand that's what's happening, you can see that in actual fact businesses are going to be targeted by your credentials being stolen, by your username and password being leaked on another website. That will bring people to your door. That's why one of the most important things we hang on about in the security industry is don't reuse your password between multiple sites. If you have an email address, which you normally just have one email address, a personal one and a business one maybe, and you use your email address to send it to lots and lots and lots of sites, if you also use the same password on more than one site, the weakest link of all the websites that you interact with becomes the threshold for you being attacked. And if you are, I'm sure there are people right now having an uh-oh moment on the call, but if you also happen to use the same password for your business account as you do for your personal account, you should know that it is not beyond the ken of the common criminal to be able to figure out which personal account marries up to which person in business, using a little bit of LinkedIn research and so on, and then trying to see, I wonder if that password will work to get into corporate resources as well. So basically, that hopefully gives a little bit of a view for how you're targeted and where the value lives. I'll stop at that. If anyone, I guess, does anyone want to come back on what I've said? Maybe the Police Scotland people have got something to say on that one.
I'll certainly speak, because one of my questions, so I'll maybe preempt something here, is can security of someone's personal data affect business data? And you've touched on it actually in a much more eloquent way than I had thought of doing it, Ian. But it's all about practicing your good cyber hygiene in your personal life. You're likely to practice it in the workplace too, using strong passwords or phrases, different passwords for different accounts, and thinking primarily social media. What do you post on social media? Or are you going to, do you plaster all over the place what football team you support, or do you have pictures with your dog Rover or whatever the dog's name might be, and folk will try and guess what your passwords are? And if your friends list and your personal security details aren't as strong as they could be, then if somebody just goes fishing around within social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn even, they will soon be able to guess a password. And if you're using those same things within the business world, then there is a very weak link there as well. So yeah, absolutely, your personal data can affect business data. Nicola, you put your hand up there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's one of the key things that you see on things like social media. If you see those Facebook posts and they pop up with, what's your Disney name? Take your first pet and your date, the date you were born and the month you were born, and give me your pet name. You've just told somebody your date of birth, what your full name is. And, they're collecting data about you. Think before you respond to these things that seem like fun. We just all have to be a little bit more guarded and think, what could someone who's just trawling through that, they're just collecting our data, and our data is valuable, and we need to take better care of it. We need to take more pride in our data. Yeah,
and people will be quite happily posting that they've got a new position as a financial director, say, for example, for a company, on somebody's going to be interested in that potentially if they're trawling through different things. And you just, as Nicola said, you just got to be guarded and be careful with your personal data, because it can very much affect everything.
For those of us who use social engineering as part of our testing, this is of course fantastic. It's great to be able to find these details and then use them as part of a tag, but it does kind of sink home just how easy it is to gather all of that information. I guess from that point of view, this seems like a sensible time to ask then. Nicola, one of the questions that we had for yourself was, what is offensive security and pen testing? You touched a little bit on what the offensive element of that is, but maybe now's a good time for you to explore that. So the question in simple terms, what is offensive security and pen testing, and how can this benefit SMEs?
Yeah, so one of the first questions that I tend to come back with and ask people when they ask me that, I steer away from the technical and I say, when was the last time you went for a drive without wearing your seatbelt? We don't do it, not least because it's illegal, but that wasn't always the case. Cars are built with safety and security in mind. It's part of their design. It's inherent to the materials that they're built from. But before you'll ever be handed the keys to a brand new car, it will have been rigorously crash tested to iron out any major flaws, to find out what the risky elements of that are, and critically to know what the impact might be if the worst case scenario on the road were realized. So essentially, pen testing is the crash test of your IT systems. And as I mentioned before, that could be a new app that you're building and developing, which is fantastic. And we've seen some amazing new startups. We've been working with some brilliant developers that are starting fantastic apps off the back of COVID, skill sharing. There are people that, marketplace apps and so on. We're in a much more connected world, but before we want to give people the keys to that, before we want to let people use it, we want to make sure that they're safe in the same way that we would crash test a car before we hand over the keys. So that's a little bit of an analogy of what I would say that pen testing is. More day to day, what do we do? Like I say, we work with businesses at all different stages. It's much easier before you deploy a new system, whether that's an app or a web app, whether that's you're using on your mobile or you're using on a desktop. Any piece of software that you're developing, any office system, and any staff system that you're using, it's much easier to test those things and pen test them before you deploy them, because it's way harder. If you're giving someone a gift, it's always worse to give them the gift and then say, oh, I've forgotten to put something in it, give it me back, I'm going to unwrap it, put that in, and then give it back to you. It's a lot of work and it wastes a lot of your effort and time. So I always say implement testing into the earlier stages of your business. So how can it benefit SMEs then? Well, it might not be appropriate that pen testing is for every SME. It's certainly not. But the reason why I like engaging with small businesses is because I genuinely believe that from a small acorn, a mighty oak can grow. And it's really, really important that businesses that are just starting out know that pen testing is something that they can implement into their planning as they go forward, and that when the time is right, there are businesses such as ours that can help to provide a risk assessment, a cyber risk assessment essentially, of any system that's facing the internet. So it's not to say that you would then want to fix absolutely everything, because no organization is entirely risk-free. It's about managing that risk. So if you have critical risks, yes, you might want to iron those out before you go live. You might want to address those first, but there might be lower level risks that are there, and you can implement other measures that will help you to absorb or minimize those risks a little bit. So it's essentially risk assessment as you would with any other aspect of your business, whether that's financial or general health and safety risk assessments. We're so used to doing them. And very often with health and safety risk assessments, we can see the risks, fire or traffic or something. We know what the risks are. Problem when it comes to cyber risk is a lot of us don't know what those risks are because they're invisible to us. We're not technical individuals. And that's why businesses such as ours are there to help you to understand those risks and then make recommendations on how you want to, as your business was right for you, to manage, mitigate, and then the ongoing process of implementing pen testing in your business as it grows. We want to be there from the beginning, and we want to grow with you for a long period of time.
That's good solid answer from my perspective, because obviously we get the value of pen testing as well. I would maybe say something that says, when we were talking before the session started, one of the things that I think I'd said, I basically have the criteria for businesses that we talk to say, essentially, if you develop software and that software faces the internet, then you need to pen test it. It's just that's pretty much, you have to. It's just the cost of doing business. And in terms of how frequently, one of the things we get asked quite frequently is how frequently should we pen test? And so one of the things, I'm interested to hear your perspective on this actually. What I tend to say to clients that I've engaged with is, if you're basically, anytime you release a major version, a new version with new functionality to your app, that's a good time to pen test. And if you've had any technology change, anything in the underlying platform, so if you're built on a particular version of Ruby or whatever as your underlying engine, and you bumped a version, that's a good time to check as well. Would you add any to that, or?
Yeah, so we would always say the same. We recommend probably 6 monthly. So 6 monthly, or every time you implement new functionality or you're bumped up to different versions, whichever comes first. So again, I know I keep coming back to the analogy of a car, but we're so familiar with that it's really important. The same way that you take your car for its MOT and you get it serviced, do the same with your apps. Get it pen tested every time you go through a major version change or you implement new functionality. So as you grow, always make sure that you've got pen testing in the strategy. It's part of your strategy, and it's part of the costs of developing your app.
Indeed. I guess one of the things we've touched a couple of times on the kind of a friendliness and closeness of the cyber industry in Scotland. We are quite a small industry. We're growing rapidly, but we are still quite a small industry. We know each other mostly. And one of the things I think this comes to light and is in penetration testing. One of the things we advise customers to do is to actually get to know a couple of firms, get to know a couple of potential testers, and treat it as a panel. So essentially, that when you do testing of an application, if it's being tested by one particular tester, getting exactly the same set of eyes to look at it again isn't necessarily going to give the full value, but throwing in another set of eyes to just give another opinion, another view, maybe a different testing methodology, something like that, is a good way to just test the thing all around and make sure you get it right. And from that point of view, it's that useful thing of building up a set of partners that you could go to and talk to about different aspects of the industry. That's something. I mean, Declan, have you got anything maybe to add on that one? I think that SBRC gives some guidance on pen testing as well, yeah?
Yeah, so we tend to deal with kind of very small businesses on that aspect. So we would do kind of rudimentary scans and so forth, rather than full-blown pen tests. But we say that, you know, as you grow, you're going to need to look at upgrading this, and if you like kind of you both said any sort of new version, or if you're upgrading a website, maybe you're adding a new login section or something like that, any sort of major change, you want to get it tested. Anything new, basically, anything that's not been tested before. You wouldn't, using the car analogy again, you wouldn't buy a car if it was just, you know, an engine and some wheels put together and no one had ever driven it before, because you'd be terrified to. You want something that's passed safety checks and so forth. So yeah, definitely would encourage pen testing.
So yeah,
I think the follow up on that is we like I say before, we don't dream of going for a drive without our seatbelt, but it wasn't always the law. The safety and security measures are there within our IT security systems. It's just that the legal requirement phase is only just creeping in, and it's there for bigger industries, it's there for bigger businesses. If you're looking at finance or government sector, then yes, there's lots of regulation and compliance around that will get rolled out, and it's about what you can do now to be proactive and stay ahead of the curve when it's your sector and your industry's turn to be subjected to that regulatory compliance.
Cool. So where I was going to try and kind of suggest the conversation went there, Nicola, was actually something that we mentioned. That you've been speaking about pen testing, and so have I. And Declan just mentioned vulnerability scanning. Is it maybe worth from yourself? I know what the difference is, but maybe folks listening don't. Do you really want to kind of explore that a little?
Yeah, without getting too technical. So vulnerability scanning is sort of an automated measure that will highlight some of your vulnerabilities, common known ones. The difference between that and manual penetration testing is a vulnerability scanner will flag up all the vulnerabilities that are there, but it won't chain them together. And that's what pen testers can do. They can say, oh, we found this vulnerability and this other one exists, and we can combine them together to create a much higher risk thing. We can actually work and pile them up and pivot dynamically throughout a system. And that's something that vulnerability scanning doesn't necessarily do. Ian, feel free to hop in on that. Like I say, I'm not sort of hugely technical on things, but I'm trying to remove the technicality.
So I'm not a pen tester. Within our team, I'm purely a consultant. I would quite happily, if any of our own team are watching, I will happily admit that the pen testers are smarter people than I am. However, what I would say in this case, we make the distinction. I think you've got it there. Is that the scanning is automated. It's tools. It's just tools to run. They give you an output, and you interpret the output. But really, it's just telling you there's maybe potential vulnerabilities there. But it's more of the prompt to go and patch your software. It's not telling you the fine detail. Penetration testing is human-led. It's a thinking activity. It's where someone will actually emulate an adversary, or emulate an attacker to try to find out what could someone do with those vulnerabilities. Could they get in? Could they actually do something? Could they gain access to your data, and so on? So the reason I think for labouring the point is folks in the audience may well have went out and asked for a price of a pen test, and then been faced with two wildly different numbers and not maybe understood why. So one of the things that's happened is quite often people will refer to a vulnerability scan as a pen test. It's not. It's a much cheaper activity. It's essentially running some very smart software, but it is just running some software and giving you the results. Whereas penetration testing requires someone who is a fully trained ethical hacker who is actually going to be carrying out a human-led investigation. And again, the big difference is if we give you back a vulnerability scan result, that means there's something there that you need to patch. But whether or not it could have actually resulted in harm, we can't say with certainty. If a penetration test comes back and says this is exploitable, it is absolutely exploitable. 100% needs to be fixed. So it's a very difference in how we handle these things. The police chaps, are you feeling? Are you excluded from this particular question, or do you want to bring any wisdom to the piece?
I just
go on, Craig.
I was just going to bring it back to, and Gavin might have done the same, the analogy of a house. A vulnerability scan would look at your house and say, that window looks like it's part open, I might be able to get in there, whereas a penetration test, they're actually going to go and try and climb through that window and see if it's possible to get into your house. So a vulnerability scan might give you an overarching detail of what looks like it might be insecure, whereas a penetration test will actually go and test that in the same way that a hacker would.
Yeah, it shoves the door open as opposed to just sees that it's open. So yeah, 100%.
Indeed. So hopefully sorry.
And sometimes as well, as you just highlighted there, vulnerability scanning can throw up false positives, quite a lot of false positives, where it'll say, oh, this is a risk. It might say that window looks open. And actually, when you go and you take a look in person, it's not, it just looks like it is. So, or it might not be a risk that can be realized. It might be a jar, but you can't open it anymore. So, you know, what pen testing will do, we'll actually go and verify a lot of the results that vulnerability scans use. I mean, we use some vulnerability scanners as a very small part of our tests. They are there to guide us as pen testers and save some time, but it's about that manual, as you say, the approach that is really simulating what a malicious attacker will do. We're not necessarily IT professionals, we're not programmers, we are security professionals, and it takes a particular mindset and a particular type of person to be a pen tester.
Indeed. So maybe we'll move across to the Police Scotland cohort. Craig, we've got a question for yourself, sir, that's been presented, which is, can you give the audience an idea of current cybersecurity threats?
Yeah, so from my kind of experience from the past few years of responding to cyber attacks in Scotland, and also working closely with the regional organised crime unit network across the UK and National Crime Agency, without a doubt, the biggest cyber threat facing UK companies is ransomware at the moment. I would say that's probably 70 to 80% of the cases that get reported into us to deal with. And for those that maybe don't know what ransomware is, it's a hacker basically gaining access to your computer network. Most common methods to do that are by exploiting your remote desktop protocol, which is basically logging in remotely to your network. The same way, if you're working from home, you would probably log in through either a VPN or remote desktop protocol into your network. And the easiest way to get in is a weak password. Usernames are easy to find, but some of the ones we've come across, passwords 4 zeros or 4 4s or 4 1s, that's one of the easiest ways to get in. The second most common way that we see is malicious emails. Someone clicks in a link or opens a document which has got some malware embedded, and either that malware runs as a ransomware or it facilitates network access. It basically sends a signal back to the hacker saying, I've now got you access into this network, and then they log on and come into your network. Once they've got into the network, what we're seeing the attackers doing is, we've talked about cybersecurity and what you can do, and you can have things like antivirus, you can have backups, but we've seen adversaries being in the network, turning off antivirus so that it doesn't block their malware running. They've deleted backups or stopped backups getting made, and they've corrupted any backups that are network connected. And that goes back to what I said before, having a secure backup policy. Your backups should definitely be, what I say, air-gapped from your traditional network. And then they effectively, all they do is run a malware or run a software program effectively. We call it malware, but all it is a software program. It opens up all your documents, encrypts them, and basically leaves the encrypted version on your system, and then leaves some sort of messaging for you to either get in touch with them via email or via a web link, and you communicate, and they demand a ransom. Most people will probably be aware of WannaCry a few years ago, and more recently the Colonial Pipeline hack in the USA, hitting kind of major critical national infrastructure. But we do see it hitting small businesses, medium businesses on a regular basis, and we see the small and medium businesses struggling a lot more to deal with the attack and recover from it. The big businesses, they've got a full critical incident response team. They bring in digital forensic external companies. They've got a whole ream of resources to throw at it, whereas the small businesses are the ones that struggle and the ones that risk going under from it. Moving on from sort of ransomware, but semi-linked, more recently we've seen a lot of criminal groups also stealing the data and holding that to secondary ransom. So you might not pay a ransom to decrypt your data because you have a good backup, but if they've stolen the data as well and threat to publish it, then we've seen that being used as a secondary ransom tactic on ransomwares. But that also happens as a standalone crime on its own. So get into the network, steal data, steal passwords, usernames, personal data, and then either hold you to ransom or sell it on, as sort of Ian alluded to, with the credit card numbers and that division of the criminal cyber business. They'll get in to steal the data and then they'll sell it on particular criminal forums. And just a few of the other attacks. Distributed denial of service. If you have a website, overloading your website with traffic and basically knocking it offline. We're tending to see that quite a bit less, although we have picked up one in the last week that we're now investigating, but nowhere near as common as it probably was 3 or 4 years ago, but effectively can be used as a tactic to disrupt you and your business operations. And one other one which Ian kind of mentioned earlier, we generally don't deal with it. It's generally economic crime, but business email compromise, effectively hacking into your email system, and then generally what they do is they wait for a big incoming or outgoing invoice. They'll effectively delete that email and they'll replace it with their own and change the bank details. And we've seen some massive sums of money get lost just because someone thinks the bank details have changed, and that kind of covers the picture at the moment. Anyone else? Anything to add on that?
I would add on basically one of the things in this is that we have our corporate mission within Quorum Cyber is we fight bullies. We fight people who do this horrible stuff, and we try to defend people who can't defend themselves. That's our mission. That's why we do what we do. And in this particular area, the ransomware attacks have been ratcheting up the evil just bit by bit by bit. In particular, the worst one I've encountered, we haven't worked with it personally, but I'm aware of, was the Finnish health system, where a system that was used to record psychiatric notes of people that were undergoing counselling for some fairly traumatic life events, and that was hacked. And what the criminals did was, firstly, they tried to ransomware the company that operated the system, and they got money, they got paid out, they got the ransom, and then decided that they hadn't made enough money out of this. And as Craig highlighted, the theme that they've got now is they steal the data as well as encrypting it and blocking access. And what that particular group of criminals then did was contacted individual people about things in their private lives that they'd said to a psychiatrist, a counsellor during counselling, and tried to extort and blackmail them individually on the basis of that. These criminals are some absolute scum. They're some of the worst people on the planet, and ultimately, don't think that you just because you're not that interesting or you're not that high profile that you wouldn't find these sorts of criminals making their way to your door. They will literally attack anyone for any amount of money. It's something to be aware of.
Yeah, just coming back in on that, the Colonial Pipeline hack was the dark side ransomware group. That's a ransomware group. They were looking to target big businesses. They were specifically picking their targets because they knew they had the facility to pay multi-million-pound ransoms. You get the whole level of that criminal enterprise. You get the criminal enterprise that will target a lot of small businesses, as I think we sort of covered earlier, and various other ones. The Full Boss ransomware group, they tend to target a lot of small businesses, and they'll pick up maybe £3,000, £5,000 in ransom a time, but they will do it on a much larger scale, and they'll target so many more companies not target, they will just look for weaknesses in any kind of small or medium enterprise. They'll target them, and then they'll seek to make a much smaller ransom, but make a lot more of them.
Yeah, and then this is something we were kind of discussing before the session started, was the volume conversation versus the big fish conversation, and yeah, being small doesn't protect you. So Declan, we haven't asked you a question yet. There's a couple we've got here for yourself. One of the things that I think is probably useful kind of flowing the conversation from here is, okay, what advice do you have for small business to actually stay safe online? So we're talking about the fear. How do you stay safe?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of tying in what we've already said. First of all, the panel discussed the basics at the start. You have to make sure that you're doing the basics because they're just so important. So we've already discussed it, so I won't need to repeat them again. But yeah, just making sure that you're doing the very basics. A lot of the resources that we've mentioned, go have a look at them. Check out the National Cybersecurity Centre's website, Cyber Scotland, all of them. Look at some of the free things that are available for you, like Exercise in the Box at SBRC, our executive education program. Something that we kind of touched on as well that I don't think we explained fully is the Cyber Essentials scheme. So this is a government-backed scheme, a UK government-backed scheme, and it's basically a set of kind of questions and controls that you as an organisation are walked through by a cyber professional organisation, and it's kind of just seeing if you've got good cyber practices in your organisation, and then if you pass, you get like a nice certificate and basically a rubber stamp to say we are an organisation that has thought about cybersecurity and started to kind of push it forward. Ian, you look like you had something to jump in there.
No, again, it's one of those things. The Cyber Essentials scheme, it's one of these things. The scheme itself has morphed through a couple of versions, and I think it is one of those things. I kind of touched earlier on talking about security as almost like an apex behaviour. You have to have a lot of things right, but having that distilled down into a simple set of what are those things? What are the things you have to do? For us, the good thing about the Cyber Essentials scheme is it gives very actionable guidance to businesses. It doesn't leave it as a nebulous, you should have a password policy. It actually says this is the sort of password policies you should have. And that makes it infinitely more useful than the more generic kind of guidance. So yeah, it's a very, very positive thing.
And something, just before we move on, something that I think we've not talked about yet, but something that is a kind of side benefit from being cyber secure and things like Cyber Essentials is you as a business or an organization can use it to promote yourself. You can say, if you've got something like Cyber Essentials, you can say when you're going to do your own business to your own clients and so forth, we've actually thought about our cybersecurity, we're taking it seriously, and it's also almost something you can use to market yourself. So there's multiple different angles you can look at the benefits of thinking about cybersecurity.
Good stuff. So I think if everyone will indulge me a wee minute, I think one of the questions that have been presented kind of ties in with this. It's how should you be safe online? So essentially I was asked, what should startup businesses be aware of in terms of potential cyber risks and threats? And I'm going to focus particularly, you notice I like doing that, I'm focused particularly on one part of the question, which is startup businesses. So essentially the smallest businesses, the people who are essentially just getting going, you've got your great idea, you've got your business, it's the early stages of life, you really want to just get on with doing what you want to do. So what do you need to do to get the security thing to the best position you can quickly and not worry about it? So I would say straight off, I kind of hinted earlier on, running your own mail server is not a thing anymore. You just can't do that. So what we'd basically be saying is the best thing you can do as a startup business is to get under the protection of the big guys quickly. And what that means is use Office 365 or G Suite. Use one of the big platforms, because what you're doing then is you're benefiting from the email hygiene that comes from having all of Microsoft's hygiene stack in front of you. And that means scanning mails to make sure that they don't contain malware, making sure that 80% of the spam doesn't hit your mailbox, all the things that are kind of phrased so they're trying to trick you into clicking a link or going somewhere dodgy, those get caught on the way in so that you are exposed to less risk. It means your email system is essentially living on a platform that is maintained by one or two of the biggest companies in the world with dedicated security staff that run into the thousands. As a small business, you can't buy that security on your own, but you can leverage the big giant platforms and do it that way. So the might have been a decision a few years back when you could kind of go at your own. Now you kind of can't. Same thing with your website. If you're wanting to go down the route of having a website, you should not be hosting your own website. You should be talking to all services content company who have bundled in the website along with the graphics design work and who have security staff or a security team that they back onto, or you should be using someone like Squarespace or Wix, one of the self-build sites, who incorporate an awful lot of security into it. Now, as soon as you actually start talking about a website that involves data behind it, that's complicated. That's where you need to talk to Nicola. You need to talk to teams like that about getting testing and security baked into the early doors of that product. But for the best part, if you basically get onto a good solid email platform and turn on your two-factor authentication once you've got it up and running, you make sure that you're using a big reputable firm, someone like Xero, for your accounts. Again, bulletproof security, audited by all the big four, well trusted, a level of threat that is way above what your business is hopefully facing. You get to buy into the security ecosystem of all of these other guys. I would say that's probably the best way as a startup to make yourself more secure than you possibly could by any other means. Now, that's maybe a wee bit controversial because I've just said go buy Microsoft or Google. Anyone want to come back on that one? Any other thoughts?
Well, I would just say, as a startup, I think you're in the best possible, or you've got the best possible opportunity there, because you can plan your growth as an organization with cybersecurity in mind. You can, any strategic move you're going to make, you can think, so like Ian said there, when you're talking about, okay, we're a brand new organization, we need email, you don't just go and get the, whatever is there. You think about cybersecurity and you think, who are going to be able to host my email securely, and it is the likes of Microsoft and Google and the big guys out there. So yeah, I think that's a real benefit, is you can look at all the resources that are available and make every plan that you've got have cybersecurity at the core of that plan, and make sure that you build your organization to be a leader in cybersecurity.
Indeed, absolutely. Yeah, Nicola, you were asked a kind of a similar question that maybe kind of leads off in a slightly different direction, but take it where you want to, which is what's the best way for businesses to stay risk-free? It's a slightly different question, but very closely related. Yeah,
it's a good question, and we kind of have touched on a little bit earlier. I don't think it is possible for any organization to be entirely risk-free. I think it's about having being aware of what your risks are is probably crucial, rather than assuming that you don't have any risks and that everything's fine, and because I'm small, I'm not a target. We've already established that's not really a path we want to go down, and that's why everyone's here. But it's then about what measures can we implement to mitigate those risks, to share them. So do we want to look at things, products like cyber insurance? Should we be having those? Is there something that's suitable for us? And then having those solid plans in place if something were to go wrong. So as Craig touched on earlier, those recovery plans, and Ian, obviously, incident response plans. So it's not about being risk-free, it's about being risk-aware, and it's about managing those risks. So, you know, we don't live our lives entirely risk-free. We're not completely bundled up in cotton wool. It's hard to, for example, when we've got kids, it's really hard to watch them go out and hurt themselves and bump their heads, but we know that they're going to be okay. So the more aware we are of our risks, and the more planning we can do, and the more measures we can put in place to combat them or to minimize them, that's probably my answer to that question. So it's not really possible to be risk-free. It's about how we manage that risk.
Excellent response. I'd echo that. Yeah, it's that risk management and being risk aware. One of the things, I think there was a question I think had been put towards mine, was how can a business become secure from a cyber perspective? And my response to that was going to be, you can't. Absolute security is something that you can't afford, and it's almost arguable whether or not anyone could. There's one of the generals responsible for securing the US DoD network was quoted about a year or so back, basically saying, we cannot secure our network against all attacks. We have to assume breach. We have to assume that there are attackers inside our network, and our goal is to detect them and eliminate them as quickly as possible. But we can't assume, we can't protect completely against incursion. If the American Department of Defense can't protect the networks against incursion, no small business can. Ultimately, what you have to do is risk manage it, and it's therefore balancing up who's likely to be attacking you, what they're likely to do, and making sure that you are not the low-hanging fruit. You deal with as much as you possibly can, and you do the stuff that we set. Now, I noticed the various questions. There's a few of us were asked questions that have this theme of what should a business do, and it's proper advice. It's what we're here for. So I think, Craig, you were asked one which was specifically about the backup elements of that. So what is the most efficient way to back up data to keep it secure and avoid an attack, or avoid an attack? Do you want to talk to that?
So, yeah, so it's, just alluding to your thing, if someone can hack the DoD, I always say if someone can hack the FBI and the NSA, if generally a UK school kid with Asperger's can hack into those organizations, you cannot be 100% secure. So like physical security, all you can do is make it as hard as possible to get in the first place, and secure backups form part of that. What I would say is, I've alluded to how ransomware takes place, and that criminals are generally after data and encrypting your data. This kind of secondary attack of data exfiltration and stealing the data. So what you can do is you can encrypt your data at rest. There's various mechanisms where data on your network, how you store data, it's encrypted on your network. So, and you only unencrypt it when you need to use it. So if someone steals your data, they're actually stealing the encrypted data. And there are various rules and regulations around that in relation to credit card data and sensitive personal data that you should and generally must abide by. Otherwise, you're kind of in breach of GDPR. But for me, you need to ask yourself as a business, what's an appropriate amount of investment to invest in security that's relevant to your size. There's various companies out there which will sell you best backup policy. This is a best backup mechanism, network attack storage devices. They'll sell you the best thing possible, but if you don't implement it in the right way, it is absolutely useless. And it's going back to what I alluded to earlier. You need a backup, you need to secure all your data, and you need to keep it separate from your network that you are operating on. Whether that's a daily backup, a weekly backup, your kind of policy and procedures and what you can live with will dictate that. I deal with a lot of large businesses, and they'll They'll generally have a short backup every day, and they'll do a big backup once a week, and they'll back up to tape or back up offline. But there's no single best way. It's what works best for you. And as a business, what do you need to back up? Do you need to back up your whole email system? If you rely on email to do all your business, do you need to back up your website if your website's where you do all your business? Or is it just the data that's on your network that you need to back up? These are all sort of things that you need to think of from a company point of view. So I'm just going to what I've kind of got written down, that the 3 overarching factors that I would consider. Number 1, back up to an offline air-gapped environment regularly. So if someone does compromise your network or cloud storage accounts, they cannot corrupt that version of your backup. Verify the integrity of your backups on a regular basis, especially before you overwrite it. So that harks back to the thing I said earlier. We've seen companies who have been attacked by ransomware, and they've got an automatic backup run that will send to a cloud storage, and it actually overwrites the previous version. And what they've done is they've backed up the encrypted network and actually overwritten their good backups. And thirdly, test recovery from backup. And it goes back to what I said earlier. The above 2 points don't work if you can't recover. And I've seen a big multinational organization across 30 odd countries, and they had a great backup system. They only lost 1 day's worth of data, but it took them 6 to 9 months to get all their data back onto the system because they didn't have a recovery plan and they hadn't exercised it at all. So prepare for that worst case scenario, and if you do that, you'll probably recover pretty well from it.
You should be all right. Certainly with my auditor hat on, I've said many times, if you haven't tested your backup plan, you don't have a backup plan. You have a theory, and actually working it out is where you know it's going to work. So I think we're getting towards the end of our questions. So we've got a couple of things we want to kind of really make sure we get the best value out of this. One thing, Nicola, you've been asked the question. I think this is something we spoke about beforehand, but we haven't touched on during the session, which is, are small businesses more at risk of cyber attacks?
That's a good question. I think I would answer that by looking at it, as we do, from the perspective of an attacker. So I'd think, well, if I were to be a cyber criminal, it's the fastest growing type of crime in the world. There's never been a better time to be a cyber criminal. So if I am one, who am I going to target? So 2/3 of SMEs don't think that they're a target. So that's an excellent place to start. That's a good stat for me as a cyber criminal. Also, the prioritization of cybersecurity for smaller businesses, because of either their resources that have available, the awareness of the products that are there, or just the fact that they're backburnering cybersecurity when they're thinking more about business continuity and getting things up and running and launched. That's also a sign for me as a cyber criminal why it might be a good one, because they're not prioritizing cybersecurity. We were talking earlier about volume of attacks. If I'm a cyber criminal and I want to steal, say, £10 million, so I've got big aspirations as a cyber criminal, I want to steal 10 million, it's much easier for me to, instead of targeting a business that's perhaps spending 50 to 100 million on cyber defences, I'd rather go and steal £1,000 from 10,000 smaller businesses, and I'll still reach my goal. And also, sometimes smaller businesses, we don't value our assets the same. It goes back to the earlier conversation we were having about valuing, doing an initial assessment of saying, how valuable is our data? How valuable are our systems? How long could we survive if they were to go down? If they were to be compromised in any way, could we survive? Timing as well as everything. There's been a lot of change of the ways of working because of COVID. So a lot of working from home, a lot of people using their own devices as well, which throws up various different security issues. And we talked earlier about cyber hygiene, about password reuse and things such as that. So all in all, if I were to approach it from the perspective of an attacker, I would say SMEs are a pretty good punt. And that's why I think that, yes, they are. I mean, I wouldn't want to say definitively, but I do think that smaller businesses are at risk. About 42 to 43% of cyber attacks in the UK are aimed at smaller businesses. and that figure is growing year on year. So all of the evidence points to it, but I would ask perhaps Craig and Gavin to jump in on that and let me know if I'm on the right line.
Absolutely. Bring it on, Police Scotland. What have you got to add to this one for us?
Yeah. So go on, Gav, you take a turn.
Okay, it was just very briefly. I was just going to agree with Nicola. Those analogies are absolutely perfect. It's the which again, it's the simplistic view that I have on security is that if I'm going to go and break into a house, there's 4 houses in a row. 3 of them have alarms. 1 of them doesn't. I know which one I'm going for. And so whether it's a small house or a big house, it doesn't really matter. It's the security aspect of things. So you'll check to see the vulnerabilities and you'll check to see what that would be. And yeah, you're right. There's around about 2/3, about 38%, I think was the figure I've got, small organisations in the UK experienced a cyber security breach in the last 12 months and lost around about £8,000 to £9,000. Now that in itself doesn't sound very much. But if you're a cyber criminal and you've done that 100 times, then that's good business for your cyber criminal. So I'm just agreeing exactly with what Nicola said, and maybe hopefully just re-emphasising that I'm in total agreement. Craig, obviously you're going out in the field and investigating these things, so you can maybe add to that your own personal experience.
Yeah, I'd say I wouldn't necessarily say you're more likely. I would say you're just as likely as a small to medium enterprise to be the victim of an attack, and the victim of just as sophisticated an attack. The kind of the ransomware groups, a lot of them are, or the intelligence picture is that a lot of them are based in kind of Eastern Europe and Russia, and that's where they're targeting from. And we respond to the same groups going after small businesses and big businesses. There is that, as we've alluded to, there is that division of some of them only go after big businesses. They go after the whales. They go after the dark side. Did a publicity release saying they were no longer engaging in the ransomware trade because they'd made $3.5 million off the Colonial Pipeline or something like that. They've made the money, they're cutting and running. I think it more has to do with the whole force of the FBI and the US government are now looking for them. But yeah, the same kind of groups are targeting small businesses. We see sole traders subject to the same level of sophistication attacks that the big businesses are. So you are just as likely as a small business to be the victim of these attacks as you are the big businesses, but the small businesses don't make the media. That's the only thing I would say. You only read about it in the media if it is a hospital or a massive government critical national infrastructure kind of business.
Indeed. So, okay, folks. So the small business gateway folks are keen to get asking the questions which have been posed by the audience throughout it. However, I've got one. I've agreed we can do one last question. Each of us, I think pretty much all of us were asked a variation of the question, and I think this was important enough that we had to cover is what should businesses do in the event of a cyber attack? So when you have actually been the victim and it has happened, your bad day is happening. So we're short on time, folks, but if I could just get your initial your gut response, what should someone do if they're subject to attack? Nicola.
I guess I should come at the end of this one because I would say once you've had an attack and you've got everything recovered, get pen tested, see if it's relevant. Get pen tested and make sure it doesn't happen again. But I would, we're not in the field of incident response. I would let everyone else perhaps go first and then add that in as a tag along at the end if it's relevant to do.
No worries, Declan.
Yeah, I would say 3 very quick things. First, take a breath because you're probably terrified and panicking, and you just need to take a breath and get ready for what's about to come. We can get you through it, don't worry. Second, call the police, because if it is a cyber crime, you want to get the police involved as quickly as possible. And then thirdly, for Scottish businesses, you can call the SBRC Incident Response Hotline and we can take it from there. So that's your 3 things.
Craig?
Yeah, I'd just add to that the kind of obligations to report to the Information Commissioner's Office if there's been any effect to your data confidentiality, integrity, or availability. So that includes if you can't access your own data, and we quite often see companies misinterpreting that, but the National Cybersecurity Centre and the ICO are quite clear. If you cannot access your own data, then it is not available to you, then that is reportable as a data breach. What I would say, sort of more on a semi-professional and personal level from doing the degree, if you can step up an incident response team, if you're big enough to have 2, 3, 4 people with individual roles, I tend to feel that works best in responding to cyber attacks. So you appoint one person to deal with the police, you appoint one person to consider certain aspects. I tend to feel that that works best. And if you're big enough to have that kind of incident response team set up and know what roles they're going to do beforehand, then it works much more smoothly afterwards. And just further to, I've gone through the backup and recovery planning, but reputationally, think about what you're doing and do the right thing. Doing the university degree, 2 of the most talked about case studies are TalkTalk and Equifax, because of the way they did respond to cyber attacks and the impact of loss of customers that they are still feeling years after the attack, because they didn't do the right things, they didn't tell the customers. Both of them tried to cover it up initially, and they're both still feeling the effects of that. So think morally and ethically, and that's very hard to do in the heat of a cyber attack, but think about what you are doing and think not just about yourself, about what is the best thing to do going forward. And that's more from me personally, rather than any official point of view from Police Scotland.
Okay, Gavin, you anything to add to that?
No, quite frankly, not particularly. But from the prevention aspect of and it's a bit like the bolting the door after the horses, closing the door after the horse is bolted. But where there are lessons to be learned, make sure you learn the lesson, but don't be shy. As Craig mentions there, TalkTalk in particular is one I know of. That was a disaster, and let's just be honest and help and share these things for other people not to become victims of the same sort of things, and hopefully the likes of the SEPA organisation, who have been very upfront of late in relation to what happened with them around the turn of the year. The lessons have been learned there big style, and I think are continuing to be learned, and others can learn from them.
Indeed, that's good. The only thing I would add, as we're kind of closing on that one, is to say, pretty much what people have said. You should be talking to the police in case there's a degree of criminality. You should be reviewing whether or not you need to speak to the ICO, and you should be getting expert help fast. And that's talking to SBRC, or if you've got a pre-existing arrangement, or talking to someone like yourselves at Quorum Cyber. We do instant response. The other thing you should probably be doing is talking to your insurance company, because you've got cyber insurance, haven't you? Haven't you? Get yourself insurance so that it covers what happens next in terms of trying to rebuild after a cyber attack. That's the last of the questions that we've been asked, and Alison, I think, is going to join us from the Small Business Gateway team to ask the questions that have been posed by the audience, and we've got some time left for that, so good.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, guys. That was really, really informative and useful. I'm going to go off and have to do some more myself, I think. Okay, we'll just start with the questions we've got in. The one here from Shannon. She says she has a small business providing holiday lets. She has her website on WordPress. Obviously, customers can book their accommodation and make the payment online. Would you advise a better way for online payment transaction security and the website security?
I'll jump. I would say WordPress is a fairly well-maintained site. It's patched by the WordPress organization. They keep it up to date. They keep it relatively well patched. Without knowing the specific details of how payments are being done, if the payments are being done using a nice secure mechanism and being handled by someone like Stripe, and they're doing the actual back end, that would be okay. If payment information is being sent through the WordPress blog itself, or anything's arriving by email, no, don't do that. That'd be rather bad. Anyone else want to come in on that one?
Yeah, I would say WordPress is, fine. The usual kind of messages apply. Make sure you keep all of the plugins and stuff up to date. Make sure it's been maintained correctly. And then again, when it comes to payment methods, there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There are kind of third-party providers that handle it. They get their security routinely tested. Definitely look at letting them handle the payments so that you don't need to invest 3, 4, 5 times as much as you would need to make sure that the payments are handled correctly.
Yeah, I would just hop very briefly on the back of that and say, we're using trusted providers. That's great. Also, just to check configurations of any third-party providers that you're using. So, for example, recently there was a downturn in the use of Zoom because it was thought that it was very compromising in terms of security. If you have things configured securely and you're aware of what configurations you can manage yourself with these third-party applications, then you can actually tighten up the security more and more and more to be very, very secure if you're aware of what those measures are. So always take a look at what the functionality of any third-party provider that you're using is, and you should be able to make sure that the configuration is as tight as you want it to be.
Okay, great. We've got another one here. What are the panel's thoughts on AI and how will that impact the industry within the context of educating the public and businesses about cybersecurity practices?
It's maybe rude of me to jump first because I've been chairing the session. So someone else go first. That's right. I clearly have. I want to talk about this, but someone else should jump in first.
Well, what I can say on my limited knowledge of AI is that it's definitely going to be the future at some point. Whether or not the future is the next 10 years or the next 100 years, not so sure yet. But I think AI will have a part to play. We've already seen things like there's a company called Darktrace who kind of do log monitoring and so forth, but they use advanced kind of algorithms and stuff to kind of automate a lot of processes. So we're seeing it come into the industry more and more. I don't think it's at the stage or anywhere near the stage where we need to worry about an AI replacing a person in terms of cybersecurity. I still think things like pen testing, you need that out of the box thinking that so far only a human can do. And incident response, you need a human to be able to think through everything and think of every aspect. So whilst we may see one day AI becoming a huge part of cybersecurity, I think right now it's an added bonus that nice to have, not necessarily a necessity at this point.
I'll just jump in briefly. So we've seen some cyber attacks take place where they've got some advanced network monitoring software in place, and where it splits the line between machine learning and AI, that's a whole different question, which Ian looks like he's desperate to get into. But where I would say the industry is at the minute is that we've seen attacks take place against these companies because the software hasn't been installed long enough to learn what the normal is for the system that it's protecting. And as a result, it hasn't stopped some cyber attacks taking place. And I don't think it ever will stop all cyber attacks taking place because it's kind of an arms race, the chicken and the egg kind of scenario where cyber attackers have responded to all the defense mechanisms that have been put in place, and they learn how to get around them. And if AI starts looking for attacks in a certain way, then they'll just reform the attacks and come in at a different angle. It's a constant arms race, and all it will do is it'll make it harder and harder, but I don't think it will ever stop it.
Anyone else? No, I'll jump in then. Yeah, as Craig spotted exactly, it's in the definition between ML, machine learning, and AI for me. I think that the vast majority of things which are described as AI at the moment aren't. They're actually machine learning, and the distinction has to be made because machine learning models can be trained to do specific things. They need a lot of data and they need a lot of training. But once they've done that training, you can then take a very small repeatable model and scale it enormously. So things which can be very easily recognized, or things which can be picked out of network traffic and identified, sure, that's amenable to machine learning. It's something where these things can happen. It's one of the big things. Darktrace makes a big thing about being AI. I think realistically, it's just ML. There's not really much of the more general artificial intelligence. It's specific models that they use. And I think we're at this cusp where if anyone was going to make a sweeping statement about AI not going anywhere, not being the future and the rest of it, that might end up looking like a kind of Bill Gates 640k a RAM statement very quickly, but we are nowhere near there yet. And I think where we are at the moment is machine learning techniques can automate tasks that humans can do and automate them very, very quickly and reliably, but anything above and beyond what a human can do is just not there at the moment. And plucking hostile network behavior, plucking hostile attack behavior out of a set of activity and logs is something that at the moment it takes a very highly trained human quite a lot of experience and skill to do. So I don't think that is particularly amenable to AI just yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think we're probably going to run out of time, but I've got one here that I think will be possibly a good one to finish on. What's your #1 tip for business owners to be better protected by the end of the day?
Turn on 2FA. If you don't have two-factor authentication turned on, turn on two-factor authentication. It is the single most useful thing you can do to remove yourself from the low-hanging fruit basket. That would be my opinion based on what we've seen of breaches and incidents over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Two-factor authentication, secure passwords, try and use unique passwords as we've already gone, but password security and how you access, that is the single most easy way for an attacker to get into your system. If they have a username and a password, they can get in. If they have a username and a password and need to receive a text message as well to get in, they don't have control of your mobile phone, or at least the lower level attackers don't have control of your mobile phone. We do see SIM swapping attacks, which are attacks against two-factor authentication, but yeah, two-factor authentication all the way.
I'm going to say dissenting voices. Anyone got another view?
Well, I'm going to say for all of us that are on LinkedIn, add us on LinkedIn, connect with us, because we are your friends in cybersecurity now, and all of us are here because not only are we passionate about what we do and we love it, but we really believe that small businesses are incredibly valuable to the Scottish economy. We want to help you grow. We want to be with you while you grow. We want to help keep you secure. So if you reach out to us, make friends with us. That's what we're here for. We want to be your friends, and you will have people that you can reach out to in this industry with any questions. We're here to help you, so you'll be immediately more secure just by engaging with events like this and with individuals like us.
And
yeah,
I would only. Sorry, I was just going to add. Yeah, just get. I know maybe not by the end of today, but certainly think about a culture of prevention, because is it, as we've discussed, nothing is risk-free. But if you've got a culture of prevention, you will and invest in your people, time and training, etc., to make them also have that culture of cyber resilience, and not just online safety and things like that. That would be my thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar there, just to start thinking about cybersecurity, because even just having it at the back of your head, you'll just start to subconsciously do more things that will make you more secure. You know, you'll start thinking about, is this going to be the best security option? Or, you know, you'll see an article and you'll read it because it's about cybersecurity, or you'll go and check out resources at the NCSC or anything like that. So even just, you know, it was said earlier, I think Nicola said it, just even by coming along to the webinar this afternoon, you're making that first step on the cybersecurity journey. So things like that, just take a step. Don't be afraid, because there's, as again, ongoing theme, so many friends in cyber in Scotland. So you won't be alone, and everyone is here to help.
Yep. One last thing, if I can say, you just prompted me there, Declan, is we were talking about NCSC as being a great place to go and get resources. we didn't mention Small Business Gateway, because this event's been obviously organised by Small Business Gateway. They have a cracking amount of resources available on the website, and one in particular to draw your attention to is the Digital Boost programme, where you can get free mentoring and free assistance in developing your skills in the digital space, which includes an element of cybersecurity as well. So have a look at the Business Gateway site. Alison, do you want to close off, or are we there?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you very much, everyone. We do have some questions that we didn't get to, but if you're all okay, I will send these questions over and we can get in touch direct with whoever asked the questions and get an answer to them. One very quick one, I don't know if we can squeeze it in because it's probably quite an important one. Someone's asked, how do we report cyber breach and how do we contact you all? If there's any way we could squeeze that one in.
So contacting us all, there's two different questions. So to contact us all, Nicola's given the answer. We're all on LinkedIn. Hit us up on LinkedIn, send the request and we get there. For the report one, that's definitely one for the Police Scotland guys. So I will now.
Yeah, so the non-emergency number 101 would be the best way to report it, and it will generally get through to ourselves to review. The cybercrime investigations team, we generally only work 8 till 4 Monday to Friday, but we do have a 24/7 call out available for any kind of cyber incident across Scotland that warrants it. So coming in via the 101 number, you'll go through to the call centre. You might not speak to someone who's technically very knowledgeable, but they will know where to get you to in order to get it to the right person.
Cool.
Okay,
good stuff.
Great.
So do we have any more, Alison, or is that us? Are we finished now?
We have more, but I think it's probably a great place to stop. Yeah, thank you very much for your time. And as I say, we will get back to any individual questions if that's okay with you guys.
It is indeed, no problem at all. I'd just say thanks to my fellow panelists. You've made this event an absolute delight to facilitate. Thank you very much.
Thanks for looking after us, Ian.
Yeah,
Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, everyone.
No worries.
Thank you. Goodbye.